Good morning. I'm John Thomas. I'm the Senior Director of Training for City to City. Thanks for coming to the seminar. Getting here? No, getting to there from here? From here to there. Yeah. There's movement in the title. Yes, that's where we're trying to. So as you've been hearing at this conference, City to City aims to be a visionary movement of urban practitioners dedicated to global cities, to seeing transformation, but based in this thing that the renewing grace of Jesus is something that we all need to experience, not just non-Christians. It's enough to change us personally, but it changes our community, and there's a dynamic that can infiltrate a city as well. So that broad vision, that's what keeps driving us. And center to this vision is leaders. So leadership development, training, taking these ministry practitioners and somehow moving them toward this goal of being an effective, godly, gospel-saturated leader. That's my department. That's what we're intending to do. So increasingly, as we're learning and hooking up with leaders around the world, we're doing less training of church planters, and we're doing more training of trainers. So those local trainers can then contextualize and train their own people. So that's kind of what we're about right now. So just to take a page from the playbook of the educators, why don't we just find out real briefly who's here? So what do you do? Where are you located? What do you do? And then we'll come back around and maybe you've got a pressing issue, a question, just so kind of we know where you're at and what you'd like to hear. Okay? So anybody like to start?
Patty Broderick, Home Church, Moody Church, and lay leader.
Okay, great.
This is Ebenezer from India.
Okay.
So I'm currently a student at Trinity doing my PhD. I'm going back to India to largest city, Chennai.
Okay, Chennai,
so
good.
To create a church planting movement there.
And what's the school that you're in at Trinity?
Trinity Evangelical Divinity School.
Yeah, but which department? Like
educational studies.
Okay, so. Good.
My name is Michelle Thompson. I'm the Director of City Ministries at Battlestone Church in Charleston, West Virginia.
Oh, good. Cool.
And I'm a lay leader here with her.
Great.
Kelly.
Sandy Kelly, and my husband and I run the Church Planting Network in Seattle, Washington.
Hi, Sandy.
Brett Nicholson, lead pastor of a church called One Life down in Evansville, Indiana, and we're interested in starting networks in second-tier cities.
Cool.
I'm Sully, and I'm on staff with an organization, or a church planting organization called Neapolis, based in Chicago.
Teddy from Twin Cities, Minnesota, and I'm working and looking at going to seminary.
Great.
I'm Aaron, and pastor at Maplewood Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan, it's the other side of the lake, and also just exploring church planting.
Cool.
Horace Lamb, McLean Presbyterian Church in the D.C. area. I'm an elder of the church on what we call the Multiplication Committee, which is church planting and multi-site.
Great. Hi, Darcy.
Darcy carries church planting networks among Americans, small minorities, especially Brazilian and Portuguese-speaking.
Awesome. You know, I found out most states in the United States have English and Spanish as the primary languages. The third language in any given state, it's really interesting. In New York, the third language is Chinese. In Connecticut and Massachusetts, it's Portuguese. Yeah, I didn't know that. You have a lot of work to do. Great. So what would be your concern? What would be a question? Why are you here? What would be helpful for you? Anybody?
Personally,
go ahead.
That just looking at beginning seminary and what it did, what would qualify you as a better church, more person as a better church planter, or someone who would enter a church that's already doing well, or to revitalize,
okay.
What personality and
sure.
traits are better.
Yeah, good.
Oh. Yeah, I'm just very interested in, you hear all the time training leaders, training church planters, but I'm really curious about, what does that actually look like? Yeah. And I was kind of more attracted to your title than the title of the class. But
Good.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
So.
Good.
John, the description that was in the program, I thought that was right on because it answers the question of what you see as sort of the urban trends, what it takes to be a competent church planter. Mm-hmm. I read into that the contextualization issue, those sorts of things. It's pretty broad, but I found it a very interesting description.
Good.
I also looked at the description and was interested in what the skill sets are that you thought were necessary.
For church planting?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You said that that you're talking about an overview of the programs and types of training.
Yeah.
So that's I was looking for that broad schematic, broad brushstroke.
Good. So kind of how to think about starting a training program.
Not the training program itself, but what are the areas that need to be addressed?
Okay. Yeah. Good.
We live in a very socially, economic, depressed area, and our church is thriving and doing really well, and we are the biggest church in the city, but there's a section of town called the West Side, and there are 67 churches on the West Side, some of whom have 5 and 8 people. Mm-hmm. So our church pastors have started to get the passion or the idea of replanting a church, and that's why I'm here, just to, like, how do you go about not offending them when you come in and say, let us help, and by the way, we want to totally take over.
Yeah.
But I went to one workshop yesterday about that, and so I'm just here to glean whatever wisdom we'll have.
Excellent.
And want to help our city.
Yeah. Wow.
In Chennai, we have, I think, largest Christian population and with several thousands of churches, but rarely we can find evangelical churches. Mm-hmm. And liberalism, nominalism, traditionalism. Mm-hmm. So people are, onto it. So I want to create a movement that focuses on the gospel. So I want to know more about that while I'm here for the next 1 year, 2 years.
Great.
I think for myself personally is that qualities of a competent church pastor or church planter, and then I'm working in our denomination, the classes, so the local areas where we have a network now of 4 classes working together towards church multiplication instead of each individual one.
Right.
So that will not only benefit me personally in exploring church planting, but also I do feel called to continue to build leaders who are starting and strengthening churches. So maybe I'm not church planting, but I might be involved in developing leaders who are. So it's kind of a great piece. When I saw that, I was like, oh, sweet, this is both sides of the coin.
Sure. Yeah. So do you know Mike Hayes then?
I'm not familiar.
Okay. So when you talk about the classes, is that the kind of the non-geographical classes?
So ours are geographical.
Yeah.
In West Michigan, it's very Dutch oriented. So there's CRC and Christian Reformed Church and Reformed Church. Right. So those are the 4 in that particular area.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Awesome. Good. Well, I think we might be able to touch a couple of these areas. And if we don't, you just let me know. So let me start this way. If you are asking the question, how do we figure out the gap between where a leader is and where they need to be? How do we move people to that? What is that? How do we actually employ the dynamics of the gospel in training so people don't just come out to be smarter Christians? They actually are being formed into competent church planters, or whatever the goal of your training program is, right? How do you see that kind of movement, especially honoring a dynamic of the gospel, where that's the thing that you're kind of booting off of? If you're asking that kind of question, first thing that we got to talk about then is values, training values. What are those things that guide you? What are those things that you're put into a new situation?
Forgive me.
Yes.
But if you're going to use that screen, could I ask you to move a little bit to one side because you're like totally black?
I know. I want you to look at me only.
I understand. God bless.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Sure. No sweat. Thank you for saying that. I don't want you to be here for 60 minutes and I never saw anything. Is that better?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we have to talk about values. What guides us when you get into a new situation? Maybe you've been doing training that's been going well, but now you're in a different context. Maybe there's a different goal. You're training different kinds of people. It's a similar way of thinking, even though you're going to be doing different things. There are some values that can help you along the way. So let's talk about some of those. Now this is for us. All right. So we started as this ministry, and it was New York, and we were talking about global cities, and then some people from global cities actually showed up on our doorstep and said, would you train us? And we said, well, we don't know what to do. So why don't you just hang out with us? And then we'll just do this, or we'll just do that. And we started some little program, and just like anybody, you have to start with what you've got. And so we did 9 meetings, like 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Practical stuff for church planters wasn't much. We would never do that now. But that's how we had to start, because that's what we had. That's what we could do in the real world. That's what everybody does, right? And then we began to think about that and develop. So you're in seminary, some of you guys are doing training right now. We're not against theological education. Mercy, all of us have got theological education, and we've actually started a seminary in New York. So we're not against theological education or formal education. What happens in the classroom? But what our dedication is to see these movements happening right now with ministry practitioners who are either doing that work or they're ready to start a church right now. So they're not preparing for the future. They're right now in ministry. So that's one of the things that we generally do in every place we go. We train people in ministry, not for ministry. So if you're right now doing it, you can come into the incubator or the intensive program. But if you're still doing theological education, we say, get some experience, finish your degree. That's not bad, that's foundation laying. But you're not ready to go through some of the training that we've got right now, because it's for you to learn and apply immediately. That adds a whole new dynamic to your training. Because guys who are like right now in the thick of church planting, their eyes are this big, they're scared to death. It's like, man, they're really, really listening. It's not academic. It's like everything you say, I'm using tomorrow. So we kind of try to stretch it out. Take 2 years, take 3 years. Meet regularly, have a coach, have a trainer. And then you, little by little, in the thick of ministry, that's where you're going to get your training. That's where transformation is going to be happening, because you're immediately able to apply it. When you look at effective training programs, almost all of them have this one thing, an element of risk. So if you're in the 3rd year of theology, systematic theology class, not a lot of risk in that, right? You don't want to flunk your test, but not a whole lot of risk. And that's fine. That's not what seminary is for. Even though all seminaries have co-opted, look at their marketing, they've all co-opted the training language. Come and get trained. That you come and get educated. That's what that's for. And you can get trained in how you think about theology, maybe a little bit on preaching, but that's not really much. They're educating. And that is a wonderful thing. We need that. Training is a different thing, right? So training is all about development. It's all about change. It's all about taking someone, they're here, help them discover where they want to be and where they actually are at, and then let's work together. How are we going to get there? Hence the name of the title of the seminar. So in ministry adds a real-world component. Jesus trained people in ministry. It was a relational process. It took a lot of time. It was very life on life, very practical, theological, experiential, right? So they didn't, the disciples, after watching Jesus, didn't say, would you teach us about prayer? They said, teach us to pray. Train us. Make us prayers. That's a good question. So we start right there with people in ministry. Here's another thing. God has made us in such a way that change happens, real transformation, real development happens when you are in relationship. So some theorists will go as far as to say that it is relationship which educates. It's a socializing process. So it's, if you've gone through formal education, generally you think it's these concepts that are changing me. And they're very important, the truth, the principles, the concepts, the ideas, that's really important. But if you want to really have it master you and change you and you're living a different way, that's called learning. And that happens when you've got a trusted cadre. And those people are going to be sharing their lives with you. They're going to be pushing back on your ideas because you've got trust developed. They're not just going to let you say just anything. They're going to ask questions, clarifying. They're going to evaluate with love, but with honesty. And that's what really helps people transform. But you don't do that unless a relationship's been built. So when we have our Incubator Program, which is a whole day program that goes for 2 years, meets once a month, during that whole day, we dedicate at least 60 minutes to this, to relationship. Sharing your story, learning from each other, learning who you are. We do that for several months before we move off of that to where you really are starting to get to know each other. Now I can trust you. That just affects very deeply the learning process and the impact that your training has on people. So we would all say this. We would all, the priority of the gospel, living the gospel, understanding the gospel, that's it. But really, how do you do that? How do you make that practical? What does that look like in a training session? If that's the value. So for one thing that we do is, number one, we don't take for granted that the people coming in, who are almost all pastors, right, and they want to be trained as church planters, we don't take for granted that they really understand what the gospel is. Not like, we're the only ones who understand the gospel. But when I finished seminary, I could not tell you the practical outworking of the fact that I was justified. What difference does it make in my life daily? This thing of imputed righteousness, this double imputation of the gospel. What does that really mean for me? How do we train people so that's their living reality? But every morning, as we start these sessions, again, in that first hour, we're warming our hearts by the gospel. We're not taking it for granted, their own spiritual condition. So pastors don't take for granted the people in their congregation, how they're doing spiritually. They're all kind of CSI, kind of like, yeah, but I don't know. I want to get inside your heart. I want to see what's really happening down there. That's what a trainer has to do. I can't tell you how many times people have come in and we begin sharing, and after a while somebody shares something they weren't going to share. And it's a sin they're wrestling with, or my wife just left me, or something. How do you react to that? How do you create a climate where people feel free and open to share that kind of stuff? How do we pastor each other in the training room, in the training session? As trainers, we're trying to train all of our trainers. You're pastors. You've got to pastor the pastor. Nobody else is doing that. Don't take for granted their spiritual life. Many of these guys, because there's so much stress, there's so much change in their life, their family, their marriage, you just don't know what's happening. And maybe they're feeling shame about that. That's affecting them in ways they have no idea. Where can they share that? Where can they get help with that? Without derailing your whole training program, and now it's like counseling, right? It's not a counseling program, but if we just pretend like that stuff's not happening, there's not going to be transformation. And those very church planters, they'll repeat that when they go to their church. When they're training leaders, they won't be dealing with their hearts. They'll be dealing with ideas and strategy, and we've got to raise the budget. So we've got to model this. I like to cook. I didn't know I liked to cook until later in life. I was like 100. So we remodeled our kitchen, and I put this amazing stove in our kitchen, and I started using it, and it's actually fun, especially when you don't have to do it every single day. So let's say I invited you over to my apartment for dinner, and you come in, and there's stuff boiling, and there's a pan, and there's some, onions and garlic going in olive oil, and I'm chopping it up, and you just see pieces of meat, and all this stuff is around, and you're like, man, what are we going to have? And I said, I have no idea, but man, look at all this stuff. This is going to be really good. Chances are you wouldn't be too excited about the meal because I don't really have a recipe. I don't know what I'm trying to cook, right? I don't know what the dish is. Now, that's what we do in training so many times. We just are providing good concepts, good training. It was a good speaker. Yeah, well, what were you hoping to do in that? Are you just giving new ideas, or are you trying to develop this person into competence? And do you know what that is? Do you know what that competency looks like? So I've got my little factory. Let's say somebody gave me a factory. I like bikes. I'm going to make bikes in this factory. Now, there's really three parts to this, right? There's raw materials coming into my factory, and then there's the magic that we do in the factory to make the bikes, and then there's the output. There's my bike. I'm ready to sell my bike, right? So 3 parts. And what I do in the factory is the second part. What would you say, when you're thinking about designing training, where would you start in this process? Would you figure out, what do you do here? Would you figure out what's the raw materials I need and where are they and can I get them in? Or would you figure out what your bike looks like? You're saying, yeah, the education guru, Ted Ward? Yeah, so he was a mentor of mine. Yeah, I just love Ted. So he's saying here, you start at the end. So let's not look at this. Yeah, I shouldn't have put the answer up there, but exactly right. Good reading. Yeah, you don't start at the beginning here that these are people coming in. This is what everybody wants to know, right? Show me what to do. What's the curriculum? Can you give me your notes? You got a slide deck on that? Can I have that? Everybody wants to know, what do you do? When really what we ought to be doing is saying, do you have any idea what you're trying to create? What's the product look like? So like, some people look at this and they have a tricycle in mind, and other people have a racing bike, and other people have a mountain bike in mind. You've got to describe that bike first. And then you'll know, okay, now I got to take this stuff, and I got to turn this stuff into this thing. Now I know what I'm supposed to do here. So the question is not, what do I do in training? The question is, who is this person? Because once you describe that person, let's say the people coming in, they have all of these things except these 2 things. Well, now you only have to do 2 things here, right? And if you start doing all of the things, you're just wasting an amazing opportunity. Let's say you've got this, people coming in, they don't have much of this. Well, you're going to have to do a whole lot more here. So, got a question about that? Or a comment?
So you're going to talk about what that's supposed to look like at the end?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. So, so the big thing, if we're going to start at the end, have you done that work? Have you done that research to describe well the kind of person you're trying to develop? Whether that's personal characteristics, character, attitudes, interpersonal, relationship skills, or ministry skills, professional skills. What are you? This could be true for a Sunday school teacher, an elder, right? A traffic cop. Whatever the end of your training program is, you got to describe that. It's the same kind of process. Okay, so Alan Thompson and I we're in an organization. We've done research in 8 different cultures, and this is after several years and several iterations of doing this research. These are the 34 competencies that we've come up with that the practitioners, the experts say, this is what you have to have if you're going to be effective as a church planter in North America. So it's these. These are the areas, the main domain areas. So they're the bigger topics, but these right here, these 34. So we're describing. Can you? Yeah, you can't see those, can you? Okay. So in the area of integrity, you're responsible, ethical, and you inspire trust. Spiritual dynamics, there's a lot of prayer, a walk with God, and a sense of call. Missional engagement is kind of, can you lead into mission? Can you create that kind of climate? You can gather people, you engage people, there's a missional culture you can develop. Diversity, mercy ministry. Visioning capacity, so you know, motivating, managing, gospel communication, learning agility. You can tolerate ambiguity. You're a personal learner. You can adjust your strategies. Self-knowledge, self-development. Emotional stability. Family life, expectant of results. So you're action-oriented and you persevere. And then managerial courage. Those are the areas that we found out. That's what you need. So when we have a training curriculum that we're developing, we're not going to put in a lot of other training that doesn't appear on this list, because this is what the research has told us is that's important. So, have you done this? Have you described the kind of leader you're trying to develop? That's a very important thing. Questions about that? So there's an online test for both the church planter and the church planting spouse that you can take, and then people are trained to debrief this test, and you can kind of get a snapshot. There's a report, like a 10-page report that you get. Hidden strengths, blind spots, strengths and weaknesses, areas of development, that kind of thing, that your coach can use with you and help you design like a program of development so you keep growing. But those are the competencies, and our intensive program and our incubator program, our coaching program, they boot off of this. So all in the incubator, you can find references to these kinds of skills and competencies kind of shot throughout that 2-year program. So when we're assessing people, we'll assess them against this profile. When we're training, that's what we're going to do. When we evaluate you at the end, we'll come back to this. So they kind of know this is what's expected. So you wanted to know, like, what does it take? There's not a lot of context here, not a lot of texture, right? Not a lot of detail that we give right here, because if you're in Chicago, downtown with professionals, or you're downtown with a marginalized community, that's going to change something, right? Maybe not the prayer and the walk with God and the call, but just the way it's expressed, the way it's lived out, the way you train people in it. So,
it comes into like the learning agility, right? There, you can deal with ambiguity, you can adjust strategies, because then you can contextualize.
Exactly. Yeah. Because chances are, when you're in this church in this town doing this kind of work, even going to a similar kind of church in a similar kind of town, well, things have changed. You've changed. It's not the same thing. You can't just keep doing the same old thing.
Sorry, I was busy trying to take a picture.
Sure.
The ambiguity aspect, can you explain how that's...
Sure. So probably some research is pointing to the fact that one of the number one competencies for missionaries is a tolerance of ambiguity. Church planters experience this a lot. My wife did research for church planting spouses and found that that's one of the highest stressors for them. So a sense of ambiguity is, I'm in my apartment, and so is my husband. I've got my kids, and he's trying to study for a sermon. Is this my house, or is this his office? And then there's a core group meeting in here. So these kids are here. They brought their kids, and they're playing with my kids' toys. My kids don't like that, you know. Is it the church's toys, or is it my kids' toys? Is it my time? Is it God's time? There's all this ambiguity. You don't have somebody telling you do this, and there's where you work, and that's, here's your budget. All this ambiguity as well. And you've got some that just drives some people crazy, and other people are just good with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So this makes sense when you're overseas. Field-driven. So we want to be interfacing, instead of importing canned programs of training, as good as they might be, we want to talk with local leaders. We want to interface with them. We want them to come to us and say, we want to do this. This is our idea. We want to say to them, we don't have a plan for you. We're not going to try to come in and change you, help you, do this for you, because we know all this stuff. God has placed you here. You're the leaders. The Spirit is giving these kingdom gifts of Jesus to his people and to his church as he wills. And here you are already here. So we're not going to come in and take over because we're smarter and we've got a better budget and more training and we're whiter than you. We're going to come in and ask you. You're the experts. What needs to happen? You know the context better than we do. You know how things work better than we do. So you tell us what needs to happen. You tell us how we can help. We're not going to tell you how you can help, right? We're not going to develop this for you. Now that is huge in the whole missionary movement, especially the last 100 years. Just a growing sense of frustration on the part of the national church because of all these missionaries who have all this, knowledge and ideas, but it's so culturally conditioned. And they come in and they're tolerated because they have money. And the national church wants to do this thing, and they really need money. And so they put up with the missionaries a lot of times. What we're trying to say is you need a whole different posture. And it starts with the prior question of trust. You come in and you develop trust, and you don't do anything else until that trust is there. Right? So first time I went into Russia to do research, we were in Riga, Latvia. We went into St. Petersburg, met with all these guys, told them what we were going to do. I said, if you don't call me back, if you don't communicate and say, man, you could really help us, I'm not coming back. And that was 15 years ago. And I have not been back to St. Petersburg. Now I'm going to Moscow now because those leaders contacted us and said, this is what we need, this is what you guys could do. Well, let's start doing that. We talk a good bit about networks and movements. We know that you can start the very best church, reach all sorts of people, just be amazing. But even if you had 10, let's say Willow Creeks, right? 20,000 people. You had 10 Willow Creeks in every major city. Nothing would happen, right? That's not enough people. You need all sorts of levels of churches, levels of expertise. People can do things that we could never dream of doing. So we've got to have training that's adaptable. We have to have training that is not so complex and expert-based. So leaders that you train, they can take that right into their church and use it. Leaders who've been trained by leaders that you don't even know now, they can take your training materials and they can use it. So this is one of the biggest problems that we have with Incubator. I did a lot of study at Trinity with education. Changed my life. Changed so much. Gave me a job. Really, really helpful. I wanted to be an anthropologist, which is still my biggest concern, but this educational thing that I got at Trinity, wow, just really turned me around. One of the things, so I love to apply adult education theory to all the training that we do, but guess what? It's not easy to reproduce. So sometimes I've got case studies, or I've got a simulation, or I've got a game, and then a debrief, and then and I love to do that stuff, and I can just do it. And then people look at it, and it's like, what the heck is he talking about? Well, cut out a piece of paper, put it on the floor. What is this? The instructions for... It's a little bit too complex. It doesn't... It can be adaptable, and people can learn it. They're using it all over the world right now, the Incubator curriculum, but it takes a certain kind of person to be able to run that curriculum because it's kind of complex. So what we're doing now is rewriting a ton of stuff that's just so much easier to facilitate, so much easier to do. Because if it takes experts to do your training program, you're going to have your, here's 25 cities who want to plant churches in, and we got 4 people who could probably do this training. No, you need 104 people. So you got to make this simpler. You've got to help, ask them to help you rewrite it. So, yeah, I understand it, I can give it to my friends, and they can do it. It's got to be reproducible. So, a big thing that we talk about a lot is being learner-centered. Jim Pluteman, who taught at Wheaton, used to ask the question, do you teach the Bible or do you teach students? That is a very good question. So basically the question is, are you content-centered or are you learner-centered? So being learner-centered doesn't mean that you have no value for the truth and you can just teach anything. No. But what it does mean is this person needs to develop, and they're going to develop one step at a time, not 10 steps at a time, and they're going to take the thing you're giving and they're going to try to orient it and hook it into what they already know and understand. Now, that's being learner-centered. So the content really, really matters. But a real adult educator is not worried about getting all the content out. Because after a while, you're not listening anyway. It might be fun. It might be interesting, incredible. It's not going to change your church. It's not going to change your life. It's not going to affect anything because you're already saturated. You have so many ideas already. So we want to go slow enough, marked by the learner. Let the learner say, I want this. I want more. I'm ready to take another step. So we're really trying to gauge. We know the truth. We know the ideas and the concepts. We're trying to find out, how much do you know? How much can you apply now? What are you motivated to learn? What do you want to learn? Because adults, they have their own inborn drive to develop, to get better. So I love sailing. I just love it. I didn't grow up sailing. I started dating my wife, and she had a little sailboat, and I had never been on a sailboat before, and it was so much fun. 10 or 20 years later, I said, when I'm old, I want to be able to get on a boat and just captain it for 10 days out in the sea. I just want to do that. No, nobody told me to do that. Nobody said, you get a better job if you do that. You'll make more money or you'll whatever. That was something I wanted to do. I want to be competent in captaining a boat. So I went out and I got that training. Learner-centered. If somebody doesn't want to learn about contextualization, guess what? You can be the very best and do the best kinds of things, and they're not going to learn. Why? Because they don't want to learn. They're not motivated to learn. You got to tie into what they're already motivated to do. Where do they want to grow? That's what you do. Within reason, right? Talking with them. Because almost every time, if you bring church planters in and say, we're going to be 2 years together, what do you want to study first? What will everybody say, probably? What do you think? Of all the skills and understandings involved in ministry, what do you think, mainly men who have been pastors, what do they want to get better at?
Preaching.
Exactly. And guess what they're not going to be doing for at least a year? Preaching. It's like, so that's not a just-in-time training need. So really, what do you really need? Well, you need to learn how to get to know people in this neighborhood. You need to figure out who these people are. How do you exegete that neighborhood? How do you find out what their idols, needs, wants, opportunities, what's their history, and what does that say to ministry design? And then you start learning how to do evangelism, and then maybe how to speak to them. So this thing of this dynamic process of trying to keep throwing the ball into their court. You're responsible for your own learning. What do you want to learn? You're responsible. Yeah, you're not going to show up today for the training? Okay. That's probably a bad illustration, because with only 16 meetings that we have in 2 years, generally we say you got to be here at every single one of them, and if you miss more than 2, you can't be in this program. So, but still, what are you motivated to learn? What are you driven to learn? What's the thing that you want to do? We got to tie into that, or at least affect it. And so they're taking responsibility. This just kind of goes back, this iterative process that mimics the learning process. Basically here is kind of the question that you brought up about learning methodologies. So how do we help people to be active in their own learning? So again, what you don't want to do in a training situation is what I'm doing. The way I started was, who's here? What are your learning needs? Good way to start. And then I proceeded to do all the talking. Now we're in a presentation. right? You're getting a block of information, but this is not training because you're not involved. So if I really wanted you to be involved, I'd give you one idea and we'd do something with it. Then we'd debrief that and evaluate it. And you'd see where you are. Do we need to do that some more, or are we ready to take another step? Another step. So here's another concept. Now let's practice it. You guys discuss it. I'm trying to see, do they really get the concept? Now let's practice it. Can they do what they're talking about? Oh, these guys can do that. These guys are not doing that so well. Can you guys help these guys? Let's do that again, right? So it's this thing of a learning process that allows people to grow, and you can see right there what are they able to reproduce? What can they do? One of the things that really helps, both for planning a training program and coaching as well, is just to kind of know what is this church planter going to experience? So we have these 7 stages of church planting. Our training, we don't actually bring people into our training program until stage 3. Now we've got some training here and here. This is more local church based. We've got like a fellows program or internship program, but when you're accepted as a church planter into our training, this is where we start. So these are the first 4 topics of the Incubator Program. And then it continues on. So Incubator would cover up to here. These are all Incubator training processes. But you can see it's kind of sequenced out. You're going to need to know more about these kinds of issues. But then as your church develops, it's more about managing and leading and on. Okay? Let me just finish quickly. These are the actual 16 categories or topics.
We were trying to capture that.
Yeah.
That last one.
Yeah, okay.
So the previous one.
Yeah. Why don't I just get you at the end, and I'll let you have this. So the incubator has these 16 topics. So we're always saying, if you want to have an effective ecosystem of training, you need to do training. You need to do coaching. Training and coaching, they've got to go together. Then we have assessment, and then we have parakaleo. So if you're training church planters, part of that ecosystem is you've got to care for the family. So we're dedicated to that. And then these would be the programs that, up to now, that we started with nothing because we didn't know what we were doing. And we didn't know what the movement was going to need. So we started developing these things. So from apprentice to online learning, there's your intensive. So if you don't have an incubator program, you come to like New York, Tokyo, you come to one of these places, and we'll have a 2 or 3 week training. This is the incubator, the 2-year program. And then we're getting into advanced practical workshops. We're starting to develop that now. And then for our leaders of our networks and our movement, train the trainer, coaching, network leader, seminary, I said we helped to start one of those, and city consulting. So let me stop right there. And then I'll come back so you can take a picture of those. You got it? Okay. Any questions? Sorry, this has gone on a little bit long. Questions?
You may have already covered this, but what's the time frame from I apply or get accepted and I start the process? What's the time frame?
Okay, so the incubator program is a 2-year. Okay. Although some people are wanting to go 3 years, especially if people don't have a lot of theological education and they need to kind of buttress that, which we think is a great idea. So it's probably a 9-month lead up to when you actually get into the program. So we're going to screen you. We're going to interview you. We're going to see, are you the right kind of person? Do you understand what's going to be demanded of you? It's going to be some real work because we ask people to do a lot of prep, a lot of reading before they come to the training. So we don't do any lecture in the training because you've already got those concepts. We're going to discuss it, apply it, practice it. That's what we're going to try to do in our training time. Anything else? Anybody else need the slides? I'll come back to that.
So then what's the ongoing benefit of being planted through city to city? How long do you guys walk with the church plant after launch and everything else?
That's a great question. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to resource networks. So let's say Madrid, there's no network. We find one or two guys, we might train them individually. They start. We're coaching. Then as a network gets going, hopefully the local coaches, local trainers, they can start doing that themselves. So after the 2-year, there's still maybe network activities, retreats, that kind of thing. We are trying to get out of the driver's seat and let the network lead the network. And then we're trying to resource networks so they can do their own thing. Sometimes whole regions, like all of Europe, will get together and they'll do something. So I'm going in a couple of days to Poland. All the trainers will get together. I'll train with them. And then we have this conference. So that's what just that one region's doing. But we're trying to have indigenous leadership lead those things, and we're trying to resource those guys.
That's good. How many churches have you already planted?
So I didn't. I think it's 400, maybe 500 churches. The thing is, we're not allowed to put up like the Chinese churches. Yeah. So they started with one training center. 3 years later, now they have 52 training centers.
Wow.
They're starting 5,000 churches in just several years, and it's like the government doesn't even know. Am I still being recorded? Edit that. Take the last comments off, please. Don't put that on there. Yeah. So the thing about this is, it feels to us, we always train in small groups because you don't do much training in a group bigger than 20. So 15 people, 13, 15, 16, that's a good group dynamic. And that feels like just look at the world, and we just trained 15 people. It's a drip. It's a drip in an ocean of need. But you look at this and you go, well, after 10 years, 1,600 people have been trained, but in the next 10 years, that'll be triple, maybe more than triple that, So after a while, it becomes real numbers, and you start getting some critical mass. But the thing is, this is not for us to brag. We're just doing little things. We're trying to be in the background. We're trying to be invisible. How can we help? So this big conference, we never do this kind of thing hardly, We just want to come in and say, these are the people who want to change the world. We'll invest in them. And little by little, everybody starts doing that, and then it's a mushroom. It's huge. Yeah.
So one of the things that we noticed was like that, am I called to plant a church? That free course that you have in here. How does that fit within the kind of the framework of what you're talking about?
Right. That'd be kind of a pre-screening process. So you do that first, and you think, okay, I'm kind of on the road that way. This didn't knock me out. So now maybe I'm ready for some more experience, an internship. Then there's pre-screening. We start talking to you, or actually screening for this program of Incubator. We start talking to you, and have you been assessed? What's your experience? What's your sense of call? Do we think you can also do this? Then you get into the program. So we're trying to, just like a doctoral program, they don't want to let you into that program just because you can pay. They want to let you in because they think you're going to make a difference, and we think you'll get all the way through this program. Because if you get in, you're going to get out. You're going to, we don't want you to drop out. Same thing with us, because it's really demoralizing to the cadre if somebody drops out. It's demoralizing to the church, to the family. So we don't want to let you in unless we think, we think you've got the raw material to do this and the call to do it.
So does that work into those 34 characteristics that you're already talking about then?
No, because there's some things that you can develop. You can learn preaching. There's some things you can't. Like, do you have a bias toward action? Are you afraid of people, or can you talk to people? Can you confront your idols? Are you dynamic enough that people will follow you? Because if you haven't been gifted that way, you can't train. So I think Peters used to say, if you want crazy, hire crazy, because you can't train crazy, right? So there's a lot of that with a church planter that you just got to look for it. You assess for it, because you can't, are you a little bit crazy, kind of like a jet fighter pilot? You like to break the rules. If they say no, I never break the rules, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You're not going to be a church planter. So, yeah. All right, I've gone on too far, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.